In anticipation of the release of our first eco-justice program, Sacred Land, next week, it's my pleasure to introduce the executive director of Creation Justice Ministries, who was a collaborating partner on the creation of this program. Shantha Reddy Alonso has served as the executive director of Creation Justice Ministries since 2015. Again, for those of you who are not familiar with the organization, Creation Justice Ministries is a membership organization of more than 30 Christian denominations, communions, and fellowships. It is the eco-justice partner to the National Council of Churches USA. And its mission is to educate, equip, and mobilize Christian communities to protect, restore, and rightly share God's creation. Shantha has arranged all kinds of stakeholder meetings between people of faith and their policymakers. Her ministry has been featured in The Hill, Sojourners, National Public Radio, Religion News Service, U.S. Catholic, and various podcasts. So without further ado, Shantha, we're delighted to have you, and thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation tonight, Jack, and to all of you in the Just Faith community. I have really enjoyed this partnership with Just Faith, and I've known the work of Just Faith for many years, but I'm very excited that our work together has really deepened as we've put this curriculum together that I'm so excited about sharing with everyone as it comes out next week. Today, I want to share with you a presentation called 2020 Visions. And this has been such an important year for so many reasons as we've developed our understanding of what we're called to do now as people of faith. With Creation Justice Ministries, I have, for many years, worked with communities that have talked together about what could happen if our ecological crisis gets out of control. And we have warned of a future time when, we may deal with wildfires that are out of control, and with flooding and extreme hurricanes, that we may deal with debilitatingly hot days for longer periods of time, with air quality that we can't breathe and we're being told to stay inside and run an air purifier or wear a mask. We're seeing all of that now. And as Christians, before we go into that, I just want to remember together where our faith narrative, where our narrative of salvation history starts, which is in the creation story. Let there be life is the fundamental story that we start in when we think about who we are related to and the rest of creation. And so we have to remember that as we are thinking about what is at stake for God's creation, that we know that what we've started with and what we've been entrusted with is very good. And we find restoration and hope in that very good creation. And we are tasked with upholding the integrity of that creation. Now, another fundamental truth about God's creation is that God loves diversity. God loves biodiversity. God loves human diversity. And we see this story told beautifully in Psalm 104 when we hear about the cacophony of creatures that are reveling in creation, and every creeping thing that creeps is beautiful in God's sight. And Leviathan frolics in the ocean, and we hear the story of God's love and in relationship with all of creation. So we are one part of this awesome mosaic that we are entrusted to tend. Now, this year, we have experienced the COVID-19 pandemic. It is the most significant pandemic of our lifetimes. And Pope Francis came out with an encyclical grounding us in the reality that this worldwide tragedy has momentarily revived a sense that we are a global community in the same boat, where one person's problems are the problems of all. And once more, we realize that no one is saved alone. We can only be saved together. So as we remember the truth of our unity, the truth that we are all bonded together, we unfortunately are not experiencing this pandemic all in the same way. And there are deep racial justice concerns that come from the pandemic. There are also ecological justice concerns about where the pandemic originated. So many people have become educated because of the pandemic about the reality of zoonotic diseases, diseases that pass easily from animals to humans. Zoonotic diseases are one of the things that scientists have been warning about it as we've been dealing with the biodiversity and climate crises. When the land that holds a diversity of creatures and has many species becomes more and more fragmented, and there's pressure on wildlife, and wildlife is being pushed into environments where humans live more and more, viruses that some wildlife, such as bats, are able to handle, or I think in the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, there's some strong suspicion that we may have received it from a pangolin, from a wet market. But we still don't know for sure. But when we have those wildlife-human close interactions and there is not a lot of biodiversity around us to absorb those viruses, they can spread quickly from animal to human. And we may see more instances of these types of future as zoonotic disease becomes a rising problem due to biodiversity loss. We have also seen that the pandemic is hurting our human diversity and our ability to be in solidarity across racial ethnic divides. So the pandemic has disproportionately affected Black and Indigenous people in particular, as well as Hispanics. And that is not because the virus is more attracted to people of certain races. The virus is opportunistic and will go after any human being. But our social and economic systems have made it so that due to racial injustices, those who are essential workers, those who do not have access to good health care, those who are in living situations that are in close quarters and multi-generational, are more likely to lack the protections from the virus that others in more privileged situations have. And so the COVID-19 pandemic has been one of our 2020 wake-up calls. Another wake-up call has been the public reckoning with white supremacy that has ensued after the killing of George Floyd and the killing of Breonna Taylor, of Ahmaud Arbery. We have seen that both those who are protesting against racial injustice and the white supremacist voices that had not been so emboldened to speak up before are coming out of the woodwork, and we're experiencing confrontations and uprisings that we have not seen in recent years. This is a result of some public reckonings of 2020 that we have to deal with. And as Christians, we have to think about what a role we're going to have, where are we going to stand in this situation? And this is one of my favorite visual interpretations of where we have to decide we're going to stand. There may be 99 sheep that are doing okay, but the one sheep that is in trouble is the one that we need to go after. So Justin, as we look at that parable, of Jesus's parable of the lost sheep, we can think about the Black Lives Matter movement. And when people say all lives matter, we can understand pretty well that right now we're talking about those who need justice, those who are experiencing trouble because of the unjust system. And then the unprecedented disasters that we are experiencing this year. I live in California, There is a wildfire that is now more than 1 million acres large. That's never happened before. The air quality here is very poor. I think we have a good air quality day in India, where I live, maybe once every couple weeks. We've invested in air purifiers. We are careful about when we play outdoors because of the air quality related to the wildfires. It's another wake-up call. And in different parts of the country, this is from last year, but in the Midwest, floods are really impacting the ability for farmers to grow crops the way that they always used to. We're experiencing flooding and hurricanes that are very strong in the Southeast, and devastation from hurricanes around the world. And so we are definitely in a time of reckoning. And here's another recent cartoon that I have enjoyed when we've been talking about flattening the curve of the COVID-19 pandemic. People are not necessarily thinking about how this may be just the beginning of more turmoil that we need to face, and we need to face it well. We need to flatten the curve of the climate crisis. So I've said before that this is a unique time. I actually think that this is a sacred time. It's a kairos moment for all of humanity and for God's creation. It's a time that God can work in divine ways in our world and in our lives. Kairos is a Greek word. It appears in the beginning of the Gospel of John when we talk about the coming Jesus. Jesus coming at the right time, a time when a divine intervention is needed. And I do believe that God is ready to work divine interventions in our lives with and through us because of all of these wake-up calls that we are experiencing this year. I want to share with you the part of our theme today is healing our souls, healing our communities. I do think that 2020 is awakening us to a need to do some deep work in our communities that is social, emotional, mental, and I love this paradigm that I learned from the Episcopal Church Racial Healing Program. I just want to share it with you. So let's use the chat box a little bit to interact with each other. I'm interested. I'm going to go through each of the pathways to healing that the Episcopal Church Racial Healing Program identifies. And as you have been faced with the COVID crisis, with the public reckonings with racial injustice, with the climate crisis manifestations happening all over the country, and quite possibly very soon some serious crises in our democracy, which could be the fourth reckoning that we're going to experience in 2020. What are some of the pathways to healing that seem to resonate most with you? And in my experience, different people have different spiritual gifts for engaging these different pathways. So one gift is the ability to tell the truth. So when you are witnessing the call to attention this year, are you a person who is able to see clearly and articulate, this is our situation, and this is our call to justice? There are some people who have that gift. There are some that are able to proclaim the dream, who are able to publicly acknowledge things that have been done or left undone. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King famously came up with the concept of the beloved community. The community is the people of God who are interdependent and recognize each other's dignity and work together for justice. So people who can proclaim the dream in the spirit of Dr. King and his beloved community are able to identify behaviors and commitments that will foster reconciliation, justice, and healing, and be able to draw people together in that dream and that vision. There are some people who are really inclined towards repairing the breach. So looking at what are the institutions and systems that are broken. These are the types that tend to really look towards what is the policy, the public policy solution that we need. How do we participate in repairing, restoring, and healing people, institutions, and systems? And then last, we have practicing the way of love. So how will we grow as reconcilers, healers, and justice bearers? These are people who are very relational, interpersonal. They are people who are good at gathering community. How will we actively grow relationships across the dividing walls and seek Christ in the other? So take a moment to think about these 4 pathways to healing. And if you would, please just type into the chat box where you're writing in from and which of these 4 pathways you feel most inclined towards and drawn to in this year, this Kairos moment and this time of reckoning. And Layla, if I could put you in the spot, if you could read a few out loud, that would be helpful to me since I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, absolutely. So in the chat, if you all will send those to me, I would be happy to read them out loud. We have someone from Louisville proclaiming the dream. I think that others must still be typing. We have someone from LA, the way of love, from Long Beach, telling the truth. Someone repairing the breach. Another practicing the way of love.
Mm-hmm.
Someone from Arlington, Virginia, is telling the truth. Grand Rapids, practicing the way of love. St. Paul, telling the truth.
Thank you for everybody who has shared. I really like that there are different people who are sharing different pathways. And if you're in different Just Faith groups, it's great to be mindful of the pathway that you're best at or most inclined towards, and to find other people who complement your pathway so that as your Just Faith sharing group moves together on the way to healing and justice, you are finding people who are hitting on those different ways. So I'm going to share next a little bit about some pathways to healing that we in the Creation Justice Ministries community encourage people of Christian faith to engage with when it comes to our relationship with God's creation and each other. And one key time to do it so the first thing I'm going to call attention to are the holy seasons. And I think many of us have practices around the holy seasons that are meaningful to us, but I want to especially call to our attention times when we can adapt those holy seasons to reflect on our relationship with creation. So during Lent, in the Christian calendar, we can often use Ash Wednesday as a time to see our connection with the dust of the earth. We are an incarnational faith in Christianity. And so I have seen some very thoughtful Lenten reflections around composting and the cyclical nature of life and death on earth that have been really meaningful. During Lent, Creation Justice Ministries, in partnership with the Presbyterian Church USA, has released a Tread Lightly for Lent calendar, a time to reflect on different ecological practices that you do. So many people fast during the season of Lent. There are different ways to adjust your water usage or think about your other ways that you're polluting, like plastic packaging usage, that you can become more mindful of during Lent. It's also become very popular to engage in fasting from carbon as you reduce your carbon footprint during Lent. So that's another thing to try. Often the Interfaith Power and Light chapters in different states have carbon fasts that you can do that may be state specific in terms of engaging with your utility company to reduce your carbon footprint. They've gotten pretty creative. I recommend checking them out. During April every year, there's a Sunday close to April when you can celebrate Earth Day Sunday. Creation Justice Ministries provides reflection materials every Earth Day Sunday that you're invited and welcome to download for free at earthdaysunday.org. And congregations have gotten pretty creative with their celebrations. It's a fun time to use those materials. We just finished the season of creation, which started in the Orthodox Church and then began to catch on in the World Council of Churches, and then Pope Francis joined in with the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation on September 1st, and more Catholics are now adopting the season of creation. You can find information about it at seasonofcreation.org. It typically runs from September 1st through St. Francis Day, whenever that falls in the month. And St. Francis Day itself is a wonderful time to do animal blessings and be mindful of our relationship with God's creatures. We have done some pretty creative ones that don't just involve pets, but also could involve partnerships with local zoos, aquariums, or other animal conservation organizations that can bring an animal ambassador so they can talk about animals that are endangered. That's a creative way to do something with your congregation to get them thinking beyond cats and dogs, the other creatures we share the earth with. So in general, I'm going to move on into things that faith communities can do. Education, as you all know, as a Just Faith community is incredibly important, and you can be really creative with it in your faith community. And the curriculum that comes out next week should be a very good tool for that. Creation Justice Ministries also has various Christian education resources available for free download at creationjustice.org/resources. Worship, as I mentioned, just beyond the holy seasons, there are all kinds of ways to get creative with bringing the elements into worship or taking worship outdoors, which because of the pandemic has become much more popular. So be playful and creative with worship. Here's some examples of something we did with Creation Justice Ministries. There was a proposed beyond the shore of Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. And so Greek Orthodox priests hosted an ecumenical water blessing service on the shore, and people gathered to think about blessing the water and also blessing the proposed marine monuments, educating people about concrete actions we can take for conservation while also praying for the water. Engaging in acts of confession and repentance in worship is also very important, especially as we think about our racial reckoning. These are some pictures from Standing Rock, where a copy of the Doctrine of Christian Discovery was burned in community as a symbol of repudiating that doctrine, which led to so much pain in our country from colonization, genocide, and enslavement. Taking a spiritual journey is another creative way to engage in redemptive action and that pathway of healing. This is a group of faith leaders who went to visit Bears Ears National Monuments. These pictures are all before the pandemic, so don't worry about the people who are clustered together and not wearing masks. And then cultivating your public faith voice and declaring the sacred if you're a person who's a truth teller or a visionary. Writing is a great medium, and here are a few examples of spaces where people have operated their witness. If you have a church sign, that's another place to do truth telling or vision casting, sharing the dream. And then, of course, there's advocacy. So this is a picture of us building relationships with the House Environmental Justice Task Force. Speaking truth to power is another way to engage. And for those who like public policy, who thought that was the part of the pathway to healing that they engage with, Creation Justice Ministries can help facilitate that. Engaging in convenings to talk about the problems in your community, both truth-telling, vision casting, and also doing some problem analysis together. It's really important. And then gathering the community. I'm going to flip through these because I'm watching the time. How are we doing, Layla? I think we need to wrap up pretty soon. So what I'll close with is that I find this cartoon funny. A lot of us are at a time of reckoning, and we're experiencing grief. And we may be experiencing a lot of feelings this year in 2020 with all of these reckonings and maybe you're just saying, God, like, if you're going to do this divine intervention in the Kairos time, like, just hurry up and let it be over, because it's not comfortable to be feeling all of these things, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. Eventually we will get to acceptance of some kind. But the stages of grief are cyclical. We may experience them over and over again. And I would just want to have a closing word that I've come to the conclusion through cycling through the emotions of all of these crises many times that people ask me, like, how do you find hope? How do you keep going? And I have decided that hope is not a feeling, it's a practice. And as a Christian, it's a faith practice that I engage in. And I'm able to do it because I know and trust in the forgiveness, the accompaniments of our God. And so it is something that I do. Hope is a verb. And that's it. Looking forward to conversation.
Thanks, Shantha. That's wonderful. So appreciate your presentation. I just wanted to invite folks who might have a question to send a chat message to me, and I'll be glad to pitch them over to Shantha as they come in. So I will pause and wait for your best questions. So Shantha, here's one to just get us started. One action. If we had to do something tomorrow, what could we do?
Well, make your plan to vote. If you haven't voted yet, that would be the action number one that I would say is important to do. This is the most consequential election of our lives. When we think about the timing of the interventions that we need to protect biodiversity, to protect a safe climate, we need policymakers in place who are going to prioritize that.
Mm-hmm. Shantha, I'm familiar with one particular company. I don't need to mention their name. Are basically just asking everybody to vote out anybody who denies climate change. In other words, if there's climate denial in that person's track record, just make it, sort of a non-negotiable, if you will. It's just one thing I've heard that I found kind of convincing. Here's a second question. Shantha, does creation justice work internationally, or is all your work domestic?
So Creation Justice Ministries, we are the National Council of Churches USA, and then the National Council of Churches is in relationship with the World Council of Churches. And so we are sometimes called to task through the World Council of Churches, as well as the United Nations offices of some of our member denominations and communions, to engage in international spaces. But in terms of our ministry focus, we do focus on primarily federal policy issues and education at the U.S. national level. That said, from time to time, we may engage in the international sphere. I actually just finished being part of a really interesting United Nations Faith for Earth consultation that put us in relationship with people around the world. And sharing our stories from the U.S. is really important. We did decide to focus so much on the U.S. This was a strategic decision of Creation Justice Ministries and our predecessor, National Council of Churches, because so many of the ecological woes and extractive colonialism that goes on really does originate in U.S. federal policy. And with our limited time and energy and money, we thought we really need to focus here.
Here's a couple more. How do we know the best way to get I'm sorry, let me start again. There are many groups out there doing work around environment and climate. How do we know the best way to get involved so that we have the greatest impact? Mm-hmm. Looking for, I think, biggest bang for our buck if we're going to get engaged. And while you're answering, I just realized I locked my wife out of the house, so I'm going to put my earphone on.
Yeah, so I think was it Parker Palmer who said, "Find where your gift meets the world's need"? I don't think there's an easy answer to that question, but I do encourage people to find a local initiative that you can get involved in. And I do think there is tremendous power if you are an active part of a congregation in finding people in your congregation who will work on this with you, where 2 or 3 are gathered, powerful things can happen. And I will also caution against a danger that I see in the environmental movement, where people find others that think like them, and then all of the people who think alike cluster together and only talk to each other. And I really do believe that the power of faith communities engaging in these issues is that we talk with people who don't think of this as their issue, but may commit to moral action as a natural outgrowth of their faith commitment. And you could be powerful messengers and ambassadors in that way.
Mm-hmm. Shantha, a good question here. Where is the policy intersection between eco-justice and racism?
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. I have made a personal commitment through Creation Justice Ministries that every single issue that we take on, we do it with a racial justice lens, and I have not found one yet that I can't find a racial justice lens to approach it from. So some of the fundamental places to look would be to look at the environmental justice movement. And actually, the United Church of Christ, one of our member denominations, was seminal in starting the environmental justice movement, which with their report that they commissioned called Toxic Waste and Race. It was the first report, it was published in 1987, that ever empirically showed the relationship between where a toxic site is located and where communities of color tend to live. And the study found, unfortunately, that when you control for other demographic factors, you still, even economic class, you still see extractive and dumping sites closest to communities of color. The United Church of Christ repeated this study 20 years later, and they had the same findings. So you can find that study online. Just Google toxic waste and race, United Church of Christ, and it'll pop right up. But the last time I shared with Just Faith, I talked about the doctrine of Christian discovery and just the entire way that we as human beings relate to the creation and each other. And if you actually look at this doctrine, which came out of papal bulls from the 1400s, you will see that this is the Christian empire material that Columbus used to justify removing indigenous people from land, killing or enslaving indigenous people and people of African descent, with the justification that a empire serving white landowning men was somehow God ordained. And this philosophy has endured in so many ways and is still used with white supremacists. And it affects genocide of indigenous peoples, the slave trade and its enduring legacy, as well as ecocide and the removal of native species to bring in all kinds of other species that people of European descent thought were superior. And so when you look at it that way, from the very beginning of what is now our country, you really can't pull apart the racism and the relationship to native species and to creation as it is. They're interconnected. I don't know if that's clear. The doctrine of discovery is pretty deep stuff. We could spend a lot of time talking about it.
No. Shantha, maybe we'll close with this comment. Yeah. It's just basically a statement of encouragement. And Terry writes that she just so appreciates all that you bring to the table and for your hard work. And so in that spirit, I'd like to invite everybody who's on the call tonight. We won't unmute you, but you can show your silent clapping hands to Shantha for her joining us again a second time.
Oh. Yeah. Silent clapping hands back at you. And in terms of my words of encouragement, I can't repeat enough the importance of people of faith getting the word out about issues of justice from a moral and faith-based perspective. especially in this crucial month before the election, as people are weighing what decision they're going to be making at every level of government. What are the priorities that matter most? When we think about our relationship with God's creation and each other, we have to prioritize justice and right relationship and upholding the integrity of all of creation. And so please do be emboldened, be courageous, and be caring in your outreach and communications with fellow voters.